Sunday's sermon was entitled Jesus, Power, and Mary Magdalene. It was part one of our Holy Week series on Mary Magdalene and the other women around Jesus. Why were they important? And what was Jesus' role in their life? And most importantly, how did Jesus use the power that he had as king? So we started to talk about that with Luke chapter 8, verses 1 through 3 as kind of our launching pad. And a couple of questions came in after the sermon. First one that came in was, do you think there was any woman who left her family, husband or children, to follow Jesus? Well, that's an interesting question. The role of family and women and the problems of a divide of faith in the family. And what about it? I can't think of a recorded instance of a woman who left her husband or her children to follow Jesus. The case that came up on Sunday morning was the case of, I believe it was Joanna, the wife of Herod's steward, his household manager. So she was following Jesus while being married to an officer in Herod's court. There's no indication that she left her husband. She was still married. So I can't think of a specific instance where that happened, but the New Testament does give instructions about this, and the instructions are especially in 1 Corinthians 7, where Paul has been asked a series of questions about marriage, and this scenario comes up. What if I come to Christ, but my husband is not a Christian? He does not come to Christ. Or what if I come to Christ and my wife doesn't follow me into faith? So what about that? What is the status of my children in that case? And so Paul gives the specific direction in 1 Corinthians 7 that you're to do everything you can to remain in that situation, in that marriage. He says your children are clean. They are not they are not unclean because you have come to faith and your spouse does not come to faith. So he says there's no concern about the status of your children. You haven't sinned in having children this way. But what do you do with the spouse who will not follow Christ with you? And he very specifically says, remain at peace as far as you're able in the marriage. So if you're a wife, your husband is an unbeliever, if he is willing to live with you at peace, in your new devotion to Christ, then stay in the marriage. But if the husband is not willing to do that, if he wants out, Paul's sad counsel is let him go. We're called to live at peace, and he says the believing wife or the believing husband is not bound in such instances. Now, this is not a rationale for knowingly marrying an unbeliever. That's a whole different set of issues there. This is about if you are married and you come to Christ. So that is some of the direction that Paul gives there. And I think what we would have to recognize there is that the New Testament is well aware that turning to Christ and following him in midlife could cost you your family. And not only could, but did. It not only cost you your family, it could cost you your position in your community and your ethnicity. So there are many cases recorded in the New Testament where people are put out of the synagogue for following Jesus, which is like it's much stronger than being put out of membership in a church or something like that. This is excommunication from Israel itself. Your family may not receive you. And so many people were in that kind of position. But it was not a position where a wife is pronouncing judgment on her husband and saying, I am leaving you because you don't measure up. It's quite the reverse. It's saying, I'm going to follow Christ. You refuse to live with me as I follow Christ. And so I'm going to let you go. You want to leave, and so I'm not going to prevent your leaving. That's a very different scenario. It's a much more tragic and sorrowful scenario. But that's what the New Testament does contemplate there. So very good question that raises a number of sad issues. Another question that came in was actually a revision, I think, of a question that I answered during the sermon. The question I got was, do we need to do reparations to people we have sinned against? Is that necessary? And so I answered a question about reparations of having to do with racial and ethnic issues, going back to slavery and those kinds of things. That was not the question that the person was asking. They were asking about one of the 12 steps. So of all the questions to accidentally answer, the one about reparations, that was a real bonehead move on my part. So anyhow, there's going to be a lot that we will need to talk about issues of what is corporate guilt in the Bible. How does the Bible view that? And so, that will be an ongoing discussion, but that's not the question the person was asking. The word I would use in relation to the 12 steps is restitution. So the idea that you've done something wrong to somebody and you want to make it right. And so one of the 12 steps is to pursue those you have wronged and make it right with those people, do restitution. So a couple of issues here. Is that necessary for salvation? And this is coming up. This question came in the context of Jesus forgiving Mary Magdalene, forgiving the woman who wept over his feet and anointed him, forgiving anybody their sins. Jesus is saying, I release you from that guilt and you are clean because I say so. I have the right to do that. So this person is asking, well, what about the people who are wronged? Do you still have to do anything in relation to them? So two considerations. One, in civil offenses, when you've committed crimes, in Christian faith, there is nothing that releases you from the penalty of having committed a crime. And because you did do that, and if you are forgiven by Christ, yes, your soul is clean, you have eternal life, the Holy Spirit lives in you, but there are consequences for the decisions that we make. And in the case of crimes like stealing or fraud or whatever that may be, violent crimes, there is no release from civil penalties because Christ has forgiven you. The attitude we take toward those civil penalties as a Christian is, yes, I did that. I owe this to society, and so I am going to pay that penalty, and I'm going to trust God to take care of me in that process, however challenging or difficult that may be. I've ministered to many people, predominantly men, in this situation. and their faith becomes a powerful source of renewal in the face of the consequences they have to face. And it's an important thing that that we uphold that kind of civil justice. So there is that consideration, but the broader consideration here, and I think more what the 12 steps has in mind with restitution, is the issue of you've wronged somebody, should you seek to make it right? And my answer to that would be yes, you should, not for the sake of earning forgiveness from Christ or from that person, but more for the sake of you want to restore a relationship. You want to restore years lost to divided relationship. You want to restore fellowship. You want to restore trust. All of these kinds of things go into the reasons that we would do restitution. And so the insight of the 12 steps is, yeah, you can get your life right, but there are other people around you, and you want your relationship with them to be right as well. So I would not put restitution in the category of you are kind of provisionally forgiven until you make it right, and then you're really finally right with God and right with others. No, the forgiveness is total, but Christ calls us to restore relationship. And so restitution, insofar as we are able, is the right, wise, and Christ-like path to take. One thinks of Zacchaeus. Jesus goes to his house. He's a tax collector, and he announces, because Jesus has forgiven him, I'm going to restore many times what I took from people. And so he makes restitution for what he has done as an individual. So it is an important principle, and I do think that this has implications for some of the more collective issues that we have, but the primary issue is reconciliation. I think the idea that some kind of repayment, person to person, so I've wronged you and I'm going to repay what I stole or the years that I took from you, no one can really do that. And even if you restore, let's say someone steals your car and they get your car back and it's restored to its original condition, it's still not right because the stealing still took place. You can't undo the action. And so there's something false about finding justice in restitution. There is no justice in restitution. And the same is true of civil penalties. Nobody pretends that everything's okay because a murder victim's family is in the courtroom and the murderer gets condemned to the death penalty. That doesn't restore anything. Nobody pretends this. This is an act on the part of society to restore trust with the murder victims' families and loved ones. And so I think it is important not to confuse restitution with justice. Jesus provides justice and will provide it on the last day. That is what we are looking for and hoping for. All else that we do is about the preservation of life here in this world and restoring relationship as far as possible. Big topic, but I think the headline here would be, don't confuse restoring trust with forgiveness. Forgiveness is a complete thing that Jesus gives us and that we should give to each other in Jesus' name. Restitution, restoration, reconciliation, those are all processes. and they are imperfect. So, some thoughts about these excellent questions, and I look forward to seeing you on Easter Sunday.